Okay, good morning. It's good to be back with you. We had a fun little vacation last week. I can tell you about it later if you want. We're continuing with our Lenten study, Unlikely Lent. And you'll remember that during Unlikely Lent, each week we are considering a story, or rather a character in the Passion story that is typically overlooked or pushed to the side. We've had Mary of Bethany, who anointed Jesus' feet with an exorbitant amount of expensive perfume. We've had the servant girl who called Peter outside the temple court, the Sanhedrin, and provided the opportunity for Peter to come clean about who he was, but we remember that it was that night that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. We thought about that invitation from the servant girl. Well, this week we have another character whose name is Barabbas. Do y'all know who that is? More or less? Well, first, before we get in too deep into Barabbas, a little context. Jesus has been betrayed, arrested, abandoned, denied, tried, and found guilty of blasphemy at the Sanhedrin, the temple court. And today, to use, I guess, anachronistic language, you could say we are at his sentencing hearing. Now, a little more context. All of this is taking place within the Roman province of Judea. This is so crucial to the entire gospel narrative, but we don't think about it nearly as much as we should. They are living in a Roman province. We've seen, if you're reading the Unlikely Lent book especially, that this causes a tension. The ones who are doing the governing have a fundamentally different culture than the ones who are being governed. Judea, of course, is the home of many Jewish people. Judea contains the holy city of Jerusalem, the city of David, the temple. It is the religious center for the people who are called the Hebrew people, and yet it is governed by a non-Jewish entity. The fierce and seemingly all-powerful, lest we forget, Roman Empire. So there is a tension. And Rome has to be precise in the way that they go about governing, because they want to make the most of the land and the people and the taxes, right? They need to tax the people. But they could not do so in too harsh a way, right? They could not risk a revolt. They could not destroy the temple, for instance, and put Roman monuments in its place. They needed to keep the people at bay. There needed to be space for them to practice their religion and engage in their religious practices. So Rome tries to make it so that they can have both. Their accrual of Judean resources, but doing so while allowing the people to maintain their Jewish identity. It's not an easy balance. So naturally, this delicate balance, this unique arrangement, has what we might call ripple effects. Rome essentially appoints all the important positions in the institutions in society. And if they don't directly appoint, they have a hand in it. So think about the tax collectors, right? Rome appoints the tax collectors. Now, they make sure that it's Jewish people, familiar faces, doing it, but ultimately they answer to Rome. The temple leadership. Now, maybe the people have their system of deciding who is in leadership, but Rome makes sure that they are involved in the way that everything's managed and they compensate accordingly. You see, Rome's got their hand in every little part of society. Law enforcement. The whole idea is that things look and feel relatively safe. You don't have a Roman who's the chief priest, right? It is a Judean person who may have the appearances of safety and familiarity, but be sure that Rome is in control. This delicate balance. If you are the Judean people, though, maybe it's not so bad of a deal. After all, who's protecting you from foreign adversaries, right? Rome is keeping them safe. And if you were ever going to want somebody to keep you safe, wouldn't it be the Roman Empire itself? So there's this sense of safety. And after all, they still get to go to the temple. They still get to engage in, sacrifices and their prayers. Maybe life isn't so bad. There is a sense of compromise. It could be worse. Well, this less than ideal arrangement gives rise to various factions among the people. And here's how the author of the book puts it, and her name is Rachel Billups. She says, each sect has its own strategy for survival under the iron grip of Rome. The Pharisees, for them, holiness is a high priority. They were teachers, and they were very public in the way they practiced the laws of the Torah, and they wanted to promote holiness. The Sadducees, these were the ones really most willing to play the game with Rome, and they typically enjoyed higher positions of power. That's one way to cope, of course. The Essenes, they tended to withdraw. You might say that they coped by exiting the scene as much as possible. And then you've got the Zealots. The Zealots were the rebels. They were the ones who, to use a figure of speech, wanted to burn the whole thing down. And they were open to violent means of doing it. They had the least patience for Rome, the least tolerance for compromise and middle ground. I think it's worth mentioning that among Jesus' disciples, there was a wide range of beliefs within these frameworks. So it's not like some of these are good guys and some of them are bad guys. I mean, you can imagine how this would work. Now, there's one other bit of context. I appreciate your patience with all the context. But about 200 years before this, there was a huge event called the Maccabean Revolt. And during that time, it wasn't the Romans who were in charge, it was the Greeks. And this guy named Judas Maccabeus led a successful revolt against Greek rule. Now, when we were talking about this in our small group this week, we talked about what are some events that are roughly 200 years ago in our nation's history? And do those events still affect us in some way today? We talked a little bit about the American Revolution. We talked a little bit about the Civil War. And how even though generations have passed since those events, there is something from them that we still hold on to that helps define our sense of American identity. Maybe this idea that we believe America will always prevail and that we'll fight for what's right, that maybe even that we're scrappy. This belief that God is with us. These are all part of our ethos, part of the way we understand ourselves. We'll try to step into the shoes of the Jewish people in the first century Judea, knowing the stories of Abraham and Moses and Joshua and King David and having the Maccabean revolt within the last couple hundred years. I imagine there's something in their identity, in their basic understanding of who they are, that would not allow this half-hearted Roman Jewish arrangement to last. Like, I sort of understand the impulse of the zealots to fight instead of compromise. That's what Judas Maccabeus did. How else could they become truly free? All right, we'll get back to the story. We are at Jesus' sentencing hearing. And this is after the court, the Sanhedrin, has ruled against him and said that he is blasphemous. The presider is this guy named Pontius Pilate, and he's a Roman governor of Judea. And if ever there were an embodiment of this balancing act between Roman rule and Jewish identity, he embodies this tension. He does not want to disrupt the balance. And on this day, he really had a challenge fulfilling that goal. Because on one hand, he's standing before an angry mob of people who want this man, Jesus, to be crucified, which is the most severe Roman punishment. But on the other, he's not convinced that Jesus did anything wrong. So he tries a tactic, one that it seems like he's employed before. He tells the people, since it's Passover, I forgot to mention it's Passover, although I'm not sure what Passover has to do with this act that he does, but he says, since it's Passover, I will give you the opportunity to free a prisoner, and there are two here. One is Jesus, with whom I know you're already well acquainted, and the other is this guy named Barabbas. I haven't thought in depth, really, about Barabbas all that much. The first thing I thought of when I considered Barabbas this week, the Passion of the Christ movie. Did you guys watch that? In that movie, Barabbas is pretty much one-dimensional. He is in chains, and he's like this wild man. He makes crazy sounds. And at the mention of his possible execution, he makes these demonic smiles and sticks out his tongue, and he's just completely not sympathetic. And that's how I've always thought of him, as a foil, as a bad guy. And I think historically, there's something there where that's how he's been interpreted. The idea has been that people hated Jesus so much that they would rather set this objectively evil, dangerous guy free than set Jesus free, despite not really having done anything wrong. But our author suggests that it's not that simple. And her argument comes largely from the other two Gospels, Mark and Luke, both of whom label Barabbas as, quote, an insurrectionist who committed murders at the insurrection. I had forgotten this detail myself. It doesn't say what the insurrection is, but there were lots of these sort of attempted coups, and Barabbas was at one, and things got out of hand, and it looks like he killed somebody. In other words, Barabbas did not direct his violence randomly. There were certain principles, albeit misguided principles probably, right? But principles and convictions that led him to do what he did. He wanted Rome to fall. And our author makes the argument that these anti-Roman convictions, this sort of sympathy for political violence, may well have resonated with a large portion of the population, especially the group we call the Zealots. It's not just some random bad guy. And while the specifics are hard to parse out, I take her point. That sense of nationalism, that rebellious ethos stemming from the Maccabean revolt, all of that is in play here. So when the people choose Barabbas to be freed rather than Jesus, our author argues the implications are larger than what meets the eye. Indeed, she believes the choice between Jesus and Barabbas is not just the choice between good and evil, nor is it merely a pragmatic choice, a means to their desired end. No, this is much bigger. What if the choice is between two visions of salvation itself? Salvation is the act of saving. What's going to save us? What do we need to be saved from? Well, Barabbas has his ideas. He believes the people need to be saved from Rome. And he believes that most likely that will need to happen in battle. And again, there's a certain logic to that. And look, violence, just war, that's kind of murky territory that I don't want to talk about here today, but we know how the world works. And we know how regimes change and how governments evolve over time, and sometimes in this world we live in, that helps societies get to where they want to be. It's true. But Jesus, I want you to understand, I think he has a whole other idea of what salvation means. For one, it's not tied to a particular geographical area. Salvation is spiritual in nature. And we see this from his teachings and his actions and his example. Salvation in Christ means perfect union with God and neighbor. I think that's how I'd put it. To be unencumbered by the barriers between us, like sin and fear and pride. This idea, I want to suggest, isn't necessarily new. You can see it all the way back in the Torah, in Genesis. All the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve disobey God, and what happens after they disobey God? They have shame. Their relationship is ruined. They can't even look at each other. Sin separates them from each other, and now they're not in union with God the way they once were. This theme of disunion because of sin or pride or whatever, that's all the way through the Bible. You can point that theme out in nearly every single story, directly or indirectly. Our inability to be in union with each other. And actually, you don't have to be a Bible scholar to know that, do you? Something's off, isn't it? Why is it so hard for us to relate to each other? Why are humans so prone to greed and selfishness? And why does community and harmony seem like it takes so much work? There's something off. When the author is exploring these ideas, she argues that shame is at the core of our disunion. Shame, that's a word we've already used. It comes straight from the book of Genesis. It's shame that prevents us from experiencing salvation or experiencing union with God and each other. I'm sure that as she analyzes shame and its role in our disconnection from God and each other, she must be borrowing from the shame guru herself. Do you guys know who I'm thinking of? The shame guru of this age. Her name is Brené Brown. She is the shame guru. If you haven't done it recently, please watch or rewatch her TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. It's one of the most important messages that any of us will ever hear. I really mean that. Basically, the talk begins with the premise that, quote, connection is why we're here. It sounds a bit like salvation, doesn't it? Connection, union, atonement, being at one. It's resonating. These are all different words that mean connection. Connection is why we're here. And then she says, shame is the fear of disconnection. The underlying question of shame is this: is there something about me that if other people know or see, that it will make me unworthy of connection? Is there something about me that, if known, makes me unworthy of connection? She says that this question, this burden of shame, is not just something that some people have. It is something that all of us have. Isn't that interesting? If you guys are like me at all, then you always think it's only you. This thing that's wrong, this insecurity. Do you hear the good news in that? All of us have it. Together. That thing you're ashamed of, that thing you did, that past, someone else did something too. Is there something about me that if other people know or see, it will make me unworthy of connection? I'm not thin enough, or smart enough, or successful enough, or enough like everyone else, or holy enough, or Christian enough, or you name it. It's different for everyone, and yet it's the same. So what do we do with that? With this universal condition? Well, in Brown's view, the answer to shame, the answer to disconnection, is vulnerability, which is the act of allowing one's self to be seen. You understand why that takes courage, right? To be vulnerable? Because when we choose to be seen, we cannot control how we are received. It's a risk. But I want to suggest to you that that's the whole point of church. The church is modeled on God's grace, on forgiveness, on mercy. So when people come to us honestly and with vulnerability, not ashamed of that insecurity or that thing they did, the church is called to react with grace. God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. Jesus' saving act was to force humanity into a state of vulnerability, to expose us to ourselves. Just look at his ministry. Jesus could not stand it when powerful religious people pretended to be holy while secretly accepting money or favors from Rome. He had no patience for empty acts of devotion that were just for like show or to help some kind of human gain. He pushed people until the truth came to surface, and when he had pushed as far as possible and the people said, "What did he do wrong?" the only words that were left were "Crucify him." It strikes me that Brown's thesis, the idea that life is about connection, really does sound a lot like Jesus' thesis. Jesus says the greatest commandment is what? To love God and love neighbor. Love is the divine means of connection. The problem is that the world tells us otherwise. The world says the thing that can save us is success, domination, destruction. But what ends up happening is that way of the world is a never-ending cycle. Fighting leads to more fighting. Destruction leads to retaliation, and on it goes. But in Jesus' intentional act of vulnerability, of love, he ends that destructive cycle and sets us on a new course toward real salvation. May the church offer this alternative view and be a means of grace in this broken world. Thanks be to God.